How does one live forever? In 2004, Troika Games released their third and final RPG, Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines. 22 years later, Bloodlines is revered as one of the best role-playing games of all time, its influence still felt in modern titles. Though not without its flaws, born of a tumultuous development cycle, it achieved something hard to quantify and nearly impossible to replicate. Bloodlines is timeless. Today, I want to talk about why we're still talking about Bloodlines, why it continues to capture the minds of players so long after release, and why every vampire game since has been endlessly compared to it. This is the best vampire game ever. Anemoia is defined as nostalgia for a place or time you've never experienced. If you asked people to tell you why they liked Bloodlines, most would tell you about its world, characters, gameplay, or music. But what all praise of Bloodlines has in common is an adoration for the sum of its parts and the act of being in the world. I believe this is a sense of Anemoia, and it gradually washes over the player as they wander into the game. The setup is simple. After a bad one-night stand, you've been turned into an immortal monster. Every second of the life you had before is a fading memory, soon to be transposed by your rebirth into the world of darkness, where your only immediate solace is that you might live forever. This new world, previously hidden behind an ancient curtain known as the Masquerade, is one of hunger and politics that you are but a mere pawn in. Bloodlines greets you with its handout, but gives you no handouts. You can choose your clan, you can choose your proficiencies, but after the game tempts you to say yes, to take your first steps and become a vampire, it dumps you unceremoniously into an apartment as dead-looking as you, where from the game and its occupants expect you to make a name for yourself without anyone's help. It's such a special opening hour. You aren't dragonborn or destined for great things, you're just the neonate, a fledgling, someone who is denied things, someone who runs errands for more important people, someone to be manipulated, but only by other vampires. Where you are a child among these demons, you are a god among men. And Bloodlines creates a fantasy where the player is exceptional amid an average setting. Your powers across the game allow you to interact with and bypass conventionally challenging things for the everyday person. Could the average man or woman have stopped Gimbal or gotten Mercurio's astrolite? Could they have saved Heather? The answer is almost certainly no. When I say the game gives us Anemoia, I mean that we will obviously never experience being vampires in LA during the early 2000s. But when Bloodlines opens that door, we want to walk through it again and again. This world, the power fantasy, the characters you meet, and the things you can say to them. The reason Santa Monica works so well as the game's first hub is because it lets you loose and gives you a taste of what that life could have been like. For many of Bloodlines' younger and more recent fans, those who will continue to pollinate the game's legacy, 2004 was a different time. The game serves as a window into a bygone era that some never knew, yet still crave to experience, even through an idealized lens. There's an allure to a setting that you only partially recognize, one that's missing pieces of the life currently around you, or that substitutes them with rudimentary alternatives. The player quickly realizes that Bloodlines is frozen in time, and though it would seem like a contradiction, it's the game's dated elements that help make its world and presentation so timeless. We're drawn to this period where people dressed differently, spoke differently, and behaved in ways that we find mystifying. It's the culture. Bloodlines is a game about being a monster, but much like Vampire: The Masquerade as a whole, beneath it all is a reflection of humanity, observable to all. This is further evident in the game's characters, and you'll need a few friends to survive these final nights. You meet the undead of Los Angeles at an awkward time. Frustrations between the city's 4 vampiric factions have nearly boiled over, and atop everyone's usual problems, the mystery of the Onkaran sarcophagus looms over Kindred's heads like a crown of thorns. The cast of Bloodlines is its meat and bones, and to your entertainment, you soon discover that despite their irreverence for mortals, the two are much more alike than Kindred would ever admit. Your first dealings with the Eternal enlist you in a proxy war between sisters, each sabotaging the other over petty grievances. Even though they think you're working for them, it's you who pulls the strings and declares a victor or stalemate in their battle. Part of the appeal of Bloodlines is the ability to steer its narrative in these pockets, and it's through these choices that we have our fun. After Santa Monica and the Malkavian machinations of the Voerman sisters, the plot of Bloodlines recruits you into its greater conflict, a citywide power struggle which nearly every Kindred you meet believes they can capitalize on to further their goals. The fledgling is the gun they point, but the player decides which targets to hit, or at least they think they do. Until its endings, Bloodlines is not a game where one can change the plot, but you are in control of how characters perceive you based on your dialogue and the outcomes of missions. Conversely, you're also in control of how you perceive them. For as much as Kindred hide in the shadows, their personalities shine brighter than floodlights once they ask something of you. While Bloodlines has robust systemic components that allow its players to share unique stories of meeting characters, exchanging words, and carrying out missions, the writing itself is what informs these decisions from the player. In this sense, interactions with Kindred give players the feeling that the story is much more reactive than it really is. We will all meet the titillating Toreador, Velvet Velour, but your choices in her quests are likely determined by whether you succumb to her seduction or you think it's all an act. With her look and a name more fake than diamonds sold by Fat Larry, her sincerity is indeed questionable. Is her manipulation so transparent that you have no choice but to think she's only using you, or is that how you've been accustomed to think all of the game's characters will treat you? Is she actually trying to manipulate you, or are her attempts to uphold the Masquerade genuine, and this stilted affection simply how Toreadors manifest their humanity? These questions, which rarely have wrong answers, are what goes through the mind of anyone playing Bloodlines, and understanding the clan of a Kindred gives greater insight into many of the game's conversations and your own immersion. In the same vein, we will all meet LaCroix. LaCroix is the worst kind of politician, one that believes all dissent can be silenced by the consolidation of power, to the point where he views diablerie as a brilliant solution to the city's territorial disputes. But he grows so mad in his quest for whatever is inside the sarcophagus that his petulance and insecurity weaken his judgment while turning you into his most loyal soldier. Though we can't necessarily change all of the things we do for LaCroix, the way we frame our relationship with him affects how others speak to us. In Bloodlines, despite being the vehicle that pushes the story forward, the transactional nature of almost all its interactions always makes you feel like you're being used. This is by design. The game lets Kindred withhold information from you. It lets them judge you. It lets them toy with you. And although some of Bloodline's most memorable characters only appear briefly, it's this depth that leaves a lasting impression, and what makes the idea of revisiting them in another playthrough to see what you could have said or done differently so vital to the game's replayability. And Bloodlines gives plenty reason to explore those alternate paths thanks to the tabletop RPG it's based on. While players could run through Bloodlines completely detached from the clan they've chosen, the choice is almost too paramount to role-playing and too well supported to be ignored. I don't think it's a coincidence that one of the first group of characters the game introduces us to are the Thin Bloods at the beach. Most are in a place of vulnerability, easily exploitable should the player choose to do so, the area acting as a testing ground for us to experiment with our new social prowess. In my last playthrough as a Toreador, they all got decently happy endings because I thought excessive exploitation or getting them killed would be out of character and affect my humanity. But if I was playing as a Ventru, more aligned with the Camarilla, who wouldn't even view them as real kindred, I could have killed them and no one would have cared. Through dialogue options determined by the type of kindred you play, this extends to the rest of the game. What we're talking about now goes a little beyond the game's writing into the inner workings of its systems and mechanics, and all of this could have only been achieved by a team that loved RPGs. It's been well documented that Bloodlines was a difficult game to make. Though Troika, founded by former Interplay developers, were no strangers to role-playing games, the obstacles presented by working on an incomplete version of Valve's source engine marred the development of Bloodlines in ways that one can readily see in the final product. But it was Troika's grandiose vision of what the game could be that made it so far ahead of its time. Tabletop aficionados will tell you that Bloodlines definitely took some liberties adapting Vampire the Masquerade's revised rule set and translating it into a video game, and they'd be absolutely correct. Some disciplines don't work the same, for example, and the average Vampire campaign has substantially less combat than the game, but the set of mechanics Bloodlines gained from its revised inspiration are almost immediately appreciated by its players, and the game's interpretation of the tone and themes of Vampire the Masquerade helped inform the game's role-playing, atmosphere, and world experience. The magic of Bloodlines is that it makes being a vampire compelling. The game is loaded with opportunities to use your powers, but also expects you to manage them, with the price of immortality always present on screen each time you rouse the beast. Whether it's refilling your blood bar to avoid frenzy, charting your progress in the stat sheet, considering how certain choices will affect your humanity, or evaluating potential masquerade violations, the game creates consequences for using your new powers that are felt each time you activate them. This creates a dialogue between the game and the player. A proposition. You get to build your vampire from the ground up and define them as you see fit. You'll get powers beyond your wildest dreams. You never have to pretend you're the good guy. You're a monster in a world of monsters. But even then, there are rules. There's an order to things that all but the lowest Sabbat cretins follow, and Bloodlines promises that if you play ball, you'll have the time of your unlife. Whatever Troika's failures may have been, they were all in service of creating a world where the players felt like they had agency, even down to their most minute actions, like dancing in nightclubs. Now, part of that agency is morbid, but it needs to be. You need to be able to do morally questionable or unacceptable things in Bloodlines, because otherwise the illusion falls apart. Who cares about being a vampire if you're forced to be the world's nicest vegan vampire? The fantasy of Bloodlines is a bleak and corrosive one, where you can say and do some horrible things to people, again, with consequences, but the game even giving you these freedoms is a sign that it respected its intended mature audience. Of course, because this is a Troika game, you're always granted an out. Bloodlines doesn't force you to be a terrible person. They're all choices the player consents to when they make them. You don't need to send that TV reporter to Pisha. You don't need to fully ghoul Heather to save her life. Those are choices some make because the ability to partake in any of this is its very appeal. Using its contemporary environment, Troika built Bloodlines as a game where you could experience being part of a macabre secret society. You've got responsibilities and chores, but also thrills and adventure right at your undead fingertips. What players value above all else in Bloodlines is choice, and Troika accommodated that to the best of their ability with the constraints they had at the time. I don't think Bloodlines would be the game it shipped as if Troika had approached it more pragmatically. It's a bizarre case of aiming for the moon and landing in the stars. Bloodlines could not have been found and restored to the degree it has been if it wasn't special in the first place. Countless games across time are completely unknown to you, but you've heard of Bloodlines because buried beneath a terrible release date, bugs, and conflicts between its developer and publisher was the hard work of several talented creatives that is proving to be as immortal as the licks themselves. And with that, it's important that we now turn to the community that has maintained the game since its release. In 2004, modder Dan Upright released the very first unofficial patch for Bloodlines. Later inherited by the esteemed WESP5, unofficial patches made Bloodlines accessible for the last 2 decades, vital enough to the game's stability that it's bundled into GOG's release of the game and widely recommended for newcomers on modern hardware. Thanks to unofficial patch, the Bloodlines of today is a game that can be enjoyed and criticized for its actual content, instead of being mired down by the litany of bugs it shipped with. While Bloodlines reviewed well at launch, even winning IGN's PC RPG of the Year, I truly believe that given the differences in hardware between then and now, that Bloodlines would be impossible to experience in an ideal form today without the work of WESP5 and all the other passionate modders who contributed to unofficial patch. Reading through some of Dan Upright's patch notes for his original version of unofficial patch will turn you into a Malkavian. The bugs Troika was unable to fix due to time constraints and later legally barred from fixing post-release due to the nature of their publisher contracts are so numerous, it boggles the mind. Bloodlines was not a game that should have released in the state that it did. In fact, thanks to Tim Kaine, we now know that the version of Bloodlines that shipped was from an old build that Activision carelessly sent off to be mastered, while Troika had a build with less bugs that was just a day older. When speaking about the longevity of Bloodlines, one must acknowledge how the community's restoration of the game has made it playable for so many. Unofficial patch has also acted as the bedrock for many of the game's mods that sought to expand Bloodlines beyond Troika's original designs. I did my last playthrough with Clan Quest mod, and it was an incredible experience. It's one of the most professional mods I've ever played. Since I had already beaten vanilla with the basic unofficial patch, the addition of all the new quests, East LA, the Sabat storyline, and Companion Mod Lite elevated Bloodlines for me. I can never view Bloodlines as that broken game that released in 2004, because I have never played that version. The modern gaming zeitgeist has little to no knowledge of Bloodlines as an unplayable mess. Old? Yes. Janky? Absolutely. But unofficial patch and other mods have completely shifted how people look at and remember the game, to the point where some attribute features like Camarilla Edition's Blood Timer to the base game itself. Is that fair for discourse? It's difficult to say. But unofficial patch, Clan Quest mod, Camarilla Edition, Anti-Tribu, The Final Nights, Prelude 1 and 2, War Games, LA by Night, and so many others are an inextricable part of the legacy of Bloodlines. This doesn't happen by accident, nor does it occur when the overwhelming consensus is that a game is just okay. People who have now worked in their free time for over 10 years on various mods aren't doing this for a mediocre game. Bloodlines' coterie of modders understood that by repairing the game's stability and creating their own content, they would bolster its original vision, the one that gamers see each time they play the game and fell in love with, despite all of its other flaws. Bloodlines is a game immortalized by its community, and now it's finally time to talk about what this kind of remembrance means and why it is so difficult to obtain. We still talk about Bloodlines because there is nothing else like it. I asked how one lives forever, and the answer is simple. You have to persist in people's memories. Timelessness cannot be manufactured because the work has to connect with people. And there's something about Bloodlines that entertains us. It says something about us, and it inspires us. It inspired modders to tinker with it for the last 2 decades. It inspired me to make this video, and it probably inspired you to go looking for discussion about it. This intangible and often misinterpreted element is perhaps the game's greatest success. Bloodlines will live for as long as we remember it, and as the last 22 years attest, it is a hard game to forget. I'd give just about anything to walk into the asylum for the first time again, to creep around the ocean house, or to hang out with the anarchs at the last round. The irony of Bloodlines is that it's a game about being separated from your humanity, yet it's the game's most human elements that have helped it persevere. Thanks for watching.